Lovely to virtually meet everybody again. This is, I believe, my fourth time of attending Gamification Europe. So obviously physically having attended the previous events at Brighton, Amsterdam and Berlin. So lovely to be joining everybody again, albeit virtually this time round. So those that don't know me, I'm Will Stuart-Jones, Head of Solutions Consulting for 3 Radical in the UK. Obviously I am, the person that has to try and evangelize about the value of gamification in a range of different verticals, but with a particular focus on marketing. I'm just going to apologize in advance. It looks like my dog might try to join me at this year's event. So if you do hear him barking in the background, I apologize in advance. Before we steam in, just a little bit more background. So I've been working for 3 Radical for just over 6 years now. And as I say, my role is really to help organizations understand about the value they can gain from deploying gamification across really a range of different use cases, spanning consumer, employee, and student engagement. My specific interest, and obviously the focus of today's presentation, is the use of gamification in a marketing context. I am a practitioner, so rather than focus too much on a lot of theory, I'm going to be focusing today on lots of practical examples of how we can use gamification in the marketing mix in the current climate, to address some of the challenges that people are facing today. So, the title of my talk today is Rebuilding Your Marketing Using Gamification in the Wake of the Pandemic. So before I dive into that, what I want to do is just really sort of take a step back and kind of understand a bit more about the impact that the pandemic has had on consumers, which are ultimately at the end of the day are the target audience of marketers. Now, I thought long and hard about what to write on this slide, and I guess, whatever I write here is going to be an understatement. So wherever you are, whatever you do, everyone on today's presentation has been impacted by the pandemic in some form. Hopefully not too seriously for most of you. And as I say, next year we can all look forward to meeting face to face again in whichever city we all sort of jointly crowdsource as the next destination. And in terms of that impact, that absolutely applies to marketers as well, because at the end of the day, they are beholden to consumers. So if the pandemic has caused significant changes in consumer behavior, well, that is going to directly impact marketers and how they try to go to market. So what I want to do is just spend a few slides sort of diving into this. So I was sort of researching for this talk and came across a rather nice piece of research from McKinsey & Co. that was undertaken last month. And basically they surveyed consumers around the world about how their behavior had actually changed during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this first chart here may be a little bit difficult to see on the screen. So the x-axis is basically countries, and in this particular example, the y-axis is then categories of spend, so food and grocery, clothing, household. And basically this first question, consumers were being polled to say, do you expect to spend more or less on the following products in the next 2 weeks compared to normal? And as you can see, the beauty of visualizing data, you can see here that, it's pretty much a sea of red here. There is literally, apart from groceries, spending on everything has dipped in pretty much all countries apart from China. And perhaps China is just a sort of growth economy, or perhaps is a bit further ahead in the curve in terms of addressing the pandemic. So clearly this is, unless we are perhaps in marketing for toilet paper, which obviously we know there's been a bit of a run on, no pun intended. The first challenge is clearly that consumers are spending less. So this is a sort of first disruption that marketers are experiencing. And, and this is just reinforcing what we intrinsically already know. Second chart then starts to look at, okay, what else has the pandemic impacted in terms of behavior? So, have you, as part of being locked indoors, changed your shopping behavior during the crisis? And again, unsurprisingly, 72% of consumers polled have said that yes, during this time, they have changed how they shop. It's a new behavior, but perhaps more interestingly, or more importantly, across those different countries, somewhere between 65 and 90% of those consumers have said their behavior is going to stick after COVID. Okay, so pretty important. It's not just that they've changed temporarily, they believe on an ongoing basis. However, they've, as I say, discovered a new way of shopping is going to continue after, hopefully this crisis comes to an end next year. And then finally, kind of linked to that, consumers were also asked to talk about, okay, does that mean that you have, or you're now using online as a channel of purchase more frequently than before? And again, the value of visualizing data, again, pretty much across the board here, the sea of blue illustrates, an ongoing digital adoption of that channel. Again, for pretty much all products, except in a few examples. So footwear in China, kind of understandable. Sizing products is still kind of quite difficult. So, taking that in aggregate, well, what does that mean? Well, I would suggest that means that life has just got a lot harder for most marketers. Okay, what I'm going to do is sort of expand why I believe that that's the case. So, I think fundamentally, clearly no one in any walk of life likes uncertainty, and that holds true for most facets of business, including marketing. Marketing in a changing environment is inherently difficult. Why is that? Well, I think what you find is most marketing these days is data driven, and analysis of past performance being a major input into that planning activity. And this is being, oversimplifying things a little bit, but historically, as a marketer, if I year on year target roughly the same audience, about the same previously popular products or the same types of products, using similar promotions at similar price points, the classic 4 Ps of marketing, generally speaking, my current sales or my expected sales are going to be somewhere in line with previous sales, and I present to the board a lovely graph that shows that I'm, slightly improving performance over time this year as opposed to last year if I'm doing my job really well. And before I moved into the space of gamification and marketing technology, this was absolutely my life. So I worked in magazine circulation, and in this space, publishers were very adept at predicting the outcome of their marketing efforts. So they would know the number of consumers whose magazines were expiring each month. They would know on average what the renewal rate was, so how many of those people would go on to renew their products again. And therefore, they knew how many new people they would have to acquire to keep the readership at a steady level. So, certainty, allows us to plan into the future. And, as an extension of that, a lot of marketers would then start to build models to target different types of audiences for their campaigns. So, these could fall into different buckets depending on different verticals and different use cases. Who are my most valuable customers? If I can identify the traits of the most valuable customers, I can scroll back and have a look at new customers that have the same characteristics, and then maybe nurture those towards that goal of also ending up in that most valuable segment. Likewise, again, from my history in magazine subscriptions, we knew that certain people would buy certain combinations of magazines. So again, how do we model for the best up or cross-sell prospects? And again, use that as the focus of our campaign activities. And this applies across the board. So in the charity sector, again, who are likely to be my most valuable donors? And all of these models were effectively built to predict the likelihood of response or purchase. The idea of an ideal customer profile, and I've sort of represented that with a sort of magenta icon here. And the idea, but the trouble now is that unfortunately, since the pandemic has emerged and the fact that customer behavior is changing, past behavior is no longer really a predictor of future behavior. So a lot of those things that we would have built in terms of models or looking at transactional data to try and describe or understand what consumers are likely to do going forwards, arguably are going to be, increasingly flawed as we sort of move through this current era. That for marketers has this sort of number of knock-on effects. So I guess, again, in a lot of use cases, certainly enterprise marketing, we would use those models that we had created to then try to source new customers. So, we might go to the, data aggregators that would have pools of prospect names. So we would know in our brand database who were the best performing customers. We would go to an aggregator and say, how many of these lookalikes have you got? So, If I'm extending that analogy of toilet paper, I know my best spenders happen to be single people in the southeast of England. Hey, Mr. Data Aggregator, have you got some more of those names that you can lease me, or that you can that I can purchase to allow me to market and improve my audience base? So, but I think increasingly there's two flaws with this model. So firstly, the basis or the predictions that marketers will have to identify those ideal customers are increasingly flawed because of consumer behavior change. But also data aggregators are facing other headwinds in terms of their business model. So, fundamentally, just to go through these quite quickly, attitudes to data sharing are shifting, with more consumers actively opting out, applying technology to ban ads. Alongside that, governments are reinforcing consumers by also enacting new privacy legislation to further protect consumers. And what that's doing is therefore, kind of impacting these traditional sources of data that many marketers will have gone to. So, symbolizing that by these ideal profiles disappearing from that pot. And that situation is only going to accelerate over time with the likes of things like the changes in terms of third-party cookies, which are going to disappear very shortly, which again would allow brands and organizations to know more about consumers simply via the advertising that they might deliver online. So I guess you're wondering at this stage is, well, that's great. That's kind of interesting about marketing as a whole. How do I believe that gamification can start to address these challenges? So this is what we'll sort of go through in the second half of the presentation. So if we were to recap about these challenges that marketers face, so clearly my customers have been impacted, they're spending less, their behaviors changed, so I can't necessarily go out to the historic ways of where I've got data before to find my best customers of tomorrow. So what I need to do now is arguably find alternative ways to create targeted audiences by directly capturing those consumers, capturing their initial attention. And then what I need to do now is, if I can't necessarily always rely on the insight that my transactional data may have provided me because patterns of behaviors have changed, I need a way to very quickly understand about that shifting behavior, learn more about the people that I newly acquired to my base, so that I can communicate to them accordingly. And the great news is, certainly my experience working for 3Radical over the last 6 years, I believe that gamification is a brilliant way of addressing these two challenges. And what I'll talk through now is how that can be achieved in various different ways. Okay, so first things first, okay, if I'm trying to widen my audience base, the first thing that I need to do is initiate conversation with consumers. And I think arguably most marketers would say that still remains the hardest task that most marketers face today. Advertising online or offline allows brands to create awareness, but typically there is a need to convert these largely unknown browsers of my content into known prospects. And here we found as 3Radical that even really relatively simple game mechanics can absolutely act as a great icebreaker to start this process of immediate engagement. And the reason for that is that what gamification provides at its heart is the ability to deliver a value exchange, a clearly packaged value exchange, packaged up in a fun and engaging moment of engagement. And I'm sure preaching to the converted, everybody knows that. But it really can be very, very simple. It literally is a value exchange where I'm asking for some data, a registration, the rights to communicate to somebody. I'm presenting them with something as simple as a promotional mechanic, which is inherently fun and, as I say, is the hook that wants somebody to drive somebody to engage. And then, the value exchange is data for the chance of some sort of reward. And obviously, making that variable using all the great scientific research about how variable rewards drive repeat behavior. But when we're doing something simple like this, I guess, again, thinking about my practitioner's hat, just because it's simple doesn't mean it can't be effective. In fact, what we found actually deploying some examples is that actually, when it comes to the first touch, if you make the rules of the game too complex at the outset, you're actually going to struggle to generate that initial engagement to start that conversation. The other thing that we would say is absolutely when you're trying to start the conversation with your audience, put the most important goal first and gamify the first step in your experience to drive that most important action. So if it is capturing a new name to market to, then make that the number one thing, the first thing that consumers do as part of your experience. Because inevitably, as you go forwards over time, you're going to see a drop off in engagement. So, by all means, the first touch can be, a lead on to something more complex. It could be, the first step towards building a simulated city game, whatever you want it to be. But just make sure you set the barrier to play low enough that it's inclusive for as many people as possible would be our recommendation based on our sort of experience in the wild, effectively. So what I got here is just a very simple example because it's the run up to Christmas. I just picked one for the archives that we ran. And the beauty of this is that it allows us, as I say, very quickly to move our consumer audience from being unknown to starting to be known and contactable. So in this case, pizza chain just had a very simple game mechanic in store and waiting for my food to arrive. Let's get them to play a little game. They have to capture falling pizzas and avoid obstacles. And lo and behold, the value return there is that I might win something in return. So free dessert, whatever it might be. And the beauty of this is, I've typically got a small window of engagement. So if I'm in a restaurant waiting for food, the value exchange needs to be straightforward. I haven't got half an hour to get engrossed in a particularly complex experience. It needs to be a very transparent, simple mechanic to break the ice to start the conversation. But the beauty is that even something as simple as this can then be applied in lots of different marketing contexts. Okay, so rather than just publishing display ads, which are kind of hoping that somebody's going to click through, again, you can embed that into that advertising. Likewise, in social, in the past, I've spoken to Premier League football clubs that will have 20, 30 million followers, but they don't know how to move them on in the story. So again, a simple mechanic to break the ice, football theme game, to get people to, declare a bit more about themselves, to move that, cross that barrier from unknown to known is a great first step. And then finally, as per this example, in venue as well, so to convert physical visitors from a store or an event into digital hand raisers. And so what that allows us to achieve is effectively start to address that first challenge. If I've got my current base spending less, marketing is largely a numbers game. I'm going to have to widen the customer base to replace those customers that are spending less or that we're unable to source via other mechanisms that we may have used historically. So in this diagram, the new names that I've acquired, effectively appear as these blue icons. The ideal customers are the magenta ones, and the white ones are perhaps other people in my customer base that I already have a conversation with, but aren't necessarily, the highest performing consumers. So the next step at this stage is really to use gamification to start to learn more about these new contacts as quickly as possible. You can also apply that to your existing base as well. So what are the data points that are really going to enable us to promote the most relevant products via, at the right time via the right channel? And more importantly, in the current crisis, what's changed for those consumers? Okay, so directly and explicitly ask what's changed for them. How can we change as a brand so that we're serving you more effectively? And here again, gamification can absolutely be used to do this. We call this process earning data. And what I'm going to do now is explain what we mean by that concept of earning data. So as an extension of that sort of first touch, we can absolutely use gamification right out of the gate to extend and maximize that moment of initial engagement. So by using a platform that can support real-time decisioning, what I can do when I've acquired a new customer is actually look up to the database and say, what do I know about this person? Are they a new contact or an existing customer? If they are an existing customer, what do I know about them already, or what data gaps do I have? And then, what data is really important for me to start to capture this consumer, in what order? And if I'm onboarding new people, are there immediate actions that I'd like those consumers to take? So is it signing up to the newsletter? Is it, signing up for a promotional offer, for example? So again, how that works in reality. So in the case of Bella Italia, we started to perform a lookup. where we're starting to understand and present consumers with additional goals in that moment of engagement. So, here are some more challenges. Provide us your date of birth so that we can, send you an offer at the relevant point of time. And the beauty is that the extra plays, whatever mechanic you're using, whether it's spins or points or scratches or currency to build your virtual city, that becomes the currency to motivate action. And what we say is, this is the value exchange. We're starting to earn data by providing more ability to play in return for the provision of data and action in return. And as I say, that can include explicitly asking consumers what's changed for them during the pandemic. And the beauty then is once you've initiated this conversation, we can absolutely start to move into more elegant solutions to drive repeat engagement over time, and hence this progressive capture of data that's so valuable to marketers in the current climate. So in this case, out of store and trying to drive repeat engagement, my mechanic is absolutely going to be set up to require somebody to engage repeatedly over time. And each time I engage, what can we do? Can we provide autonomy for the players in terms of what tasks they complete for the brand, where there is still a value exchange? So am I providing data? Am I watching or downloading content? Whatever it is that we know is on the path to purchase for that particular product or service, we can loop that into our gamification. That can drive progressive rewards for our audiences. And what we're looking to build is obviously a habit-forming loop of behavior where people come back repeatedly. And we know that gamification does this. Gamification absolutely drives this repeat behavior loop. But more importantly, or we believe more importantly, it's about the data that you're capturing under the bonnet, because this is the thing that's going to make the C-suite, sit up and look and understand. And we think that, what we can do with gamification is broadly drive three types of data capture. It's the factual data, the name, rank, and serial number when somebody registers. It's the behavioral data as people start to engage repeatedly. So when we've used repeat play mechanics, we absolutely see patterns of behavior emerging that people play first thing in the morning when they wake up, maybe slightly later at the weekend. Again, that's crucial data if you're somebody that's trying to target products to be sold during the day. Brilliant game where you can provide the rewards that they can redeem later in the day, a cup of coffee, whatever it might be. And then finally, when we're starting to zero in on these mechanics to explicitly capture data, this is where the real power comes out. This is where we can ask for demographics, the purchase intents, what's changed as consumers that's going to have of most value. So what that does is effectively allow us to start to progressively and very quickly build out more rounded profiles of the people that we brought on board, or the existing customers that we're now filling out. And off the back of that, we don't have to rely so much on the models or inferring answers from transactional data. We've got the answers that we can hang our communication strategies on directly from the consumers, and we can go to market via all the other channels of engagement we know that we need to drive the outcomes that we're looking for. And that's the final point just to end on then is, okay, the other thing that is really important is, as well as focusing your efforts on this data collection, this earning of data over time, which is going to make people sit up and listen, is the final sort of parting point that I would leave is that absolutely make sure that the data that your project captures is firstly measurable. That's absolutely a given, but also it's actionable. Okay, so again, we've seen fantastic projects flounder where we've captured really valuable data about consumers because the brand simply hasn't been set up to action that data. So also when you're thinking about your projects and delivering, make sure you join the dots on the final mile. So if you've captured what somebody's preferences are, how they want to be communicated by, because you've wrapped that up into a gamified experience, make sure that is driven right through to whatever MarTech platforms are required to use that data to drive value, because fundamentally driving value is how you're going to prove the value of gamification to your C-suite marketers. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thanks very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Will. That was a really excellent way to start the day. Who for you do you see as your dream customer? Who are the sorts of customers who would really benefit from this approach?
So that's a really good question. So I guess you're looking for organizations that are data driven. So, I'll give you a really good example. So I may have mentioned just before we started, we've just launched in the States. And, one of the interesting sales cycles that I'm working out there now is a healthcare company. So obviously in the States, you have to pay for healthcare. A little bit like a magazine subscription, funnily enough. You get a decision each year at this time of year whether or not you want to renew your policy with that company next year. And you can absolutely leave. You know, the numbers of people that do move about, I think it's 20 or 30% each year, which is a pretty big deal. That organization is absolutely data driven. What they're doing at the moment is they're looking at whether something has changed in terms of your policy. So is it access to drugs that's changed? Is it, you know, that your doctor that you like has moved out of network? Is that going to be the driver for attrition? Yeah, and that's because that's the data that this organization has within its control at the moment. What we're saying is actually what you need to be spinning up is experiences that are going to engage your audience throughout the year to actually understand, you know, is it other major life events that have had an impact on your decision to renew? You know, what else is going on in your life? Is it that you've had a bad experience when you've engaged with the healthcare provision, so that they can roll that into their models and their decisions? So that is, I would say, make sure it's a data-driven organization, that they can understand the value of data, that they can join the dots between that idea of earning data and turning it into action.
I think that's a really good insight, isn't it? That the clients of gamification have to already be pretty data savvy before they understand the value that this sort of earning data gamified approach will bring. No, good point. And so let me just I've got a couple of questions here for you. So we've got 2 minutes, so we can hopefully get both in. So the first one is, do you think that with companies using this approach that the market there's a chance saturated, so customers kind of get to the badge fatigue or points or game fatigue even? Do you think that that's an issue, or would you agree with that? And if so, if you did agree with it, what would be the mitigation of that?
Okay, so I'm going to say you're right. So marketing is about evolution. So I think if you look at the history of marketing, you know, unfortunately, advertising has got oversaturated. You know, radio's got oversaturated. Email marketing, when email marketing first started, that was the shiny new thing. I think the beauty is that we are in an era where gamification is still not widely adopted, and also where it drives, you know, the capture of data. So we still are in a window where we can exploit it. You know, realistically, scroll forward 10 years, there will be shiny new things on the block, and perhaps the window will move away. But then it will be about those people that execute really well. You know, it's always the same, even in direct marketing or email marketing. You know, saw a fantastic example the other day of McDonald's sending a DM piece that looked like a box of fries. There's always reinvention. So I guess that's what it comes down to us as the gamification community, to think about how we can improve the experiences that we deliver to keep it fresh and avoid it getting too stale.
Very good. 2 questions still coming in. Right, early stage. I don't know whether we're going to get to both of them, but as we've got an early stage unfunded startup, so someone perhaps not at the sort of the scale of the Bella Italias of this world. Have you come across any tools or marketing technical platforms that they can use at a sort of a simpler level to implement this?
Gosh, so there's lots of people out there. I think what I would say is it's about fitting into the wider marketing mix that an organization's got going on. So what I would say is, and I firmly believe this, it's a bit of a hackneyed analogy, gamification is quite often not necessarily the thing that brings the horse to water. It's more the mechanic that makes the horse drink and drink repeatedly. Okay, so you're still relying on all the other channels, you know, but you're trying to improve the quality of the messaging that you're going out with. So it's a differentiated experience that you're driving people to on your email, on your advertising, or on your social. So it's really about understanding what mix of technologies people have got and making sure people are geared up with a launch plan to get your gamification campaign in front of as many eyeballs as possible using those traditional mechanisms. And then the gamification engine springs to life in terms of value, you know, building value in terms of those moments of engagement, maximizing the value that you capture, maximizing the actions, getting people to come back repeatedly. And once they've engaged, absolutely using, you know, referral mechanics within your gamification experience to build the audience via word of mouth marketing. Yeah. So what I would say is, yeah, by all means, pick something. Can be quite simple, but, you know, don't think about the wider marketing mix and how it's going to fit in to a company's ecosystem as they go to market.
Super. Thank you so much, Will.